All right, well, let's go ahead and get started just in the interest of time and respecting everybody that got here on time. And I want to welcome you to the TNOTA Student Involvement Committee quarterly virtual chat. I'm Jennifer Henderson. I am co-chair of the Student Involvement Committee for the TNOTA. I also want to introduce Taylor Kozel. She is the new co-chair with me. I took over this role back, I guess it was last August, and I've been kind of flying solo as the only practitioner, and she has joined me as of about conference time in September. Taylor, do you want to pop on and just introduce yourself to everyone and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hey guys. My name's Taylor. I love OT. I'm currently assistant professor and academic fieldwork coordinator at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. So East Tennessee, what up? Thank you, Christian, grad from our program. Yeah, that's I guess the most important thing. I'm a clinician. I did travel therapy. I do neuro across the lifespan. That's my jam. But mainly I love OT and I love working with students, which is part of the reason I went into academia and I'm now co-chairing this committee with the best.
Well, thank you. Oh, and hey, if you guys are interested in aquatics, this is your person too.
Oh, yes. I just started. Thank you. Thank you so much for that plug slash reminder. I started a special interest group for aquatic therapy with TNOTA, and we're going to start meeting next year. I'm just getting people's opinions on good days and times. So, but I think in the most recent TNOTA newsletter, there's a link with a Google Doc. And I can also just drop it in here, actually, if you want to be part of my mail list.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I also want to recognize Dina Kendall, and she is a new practitioner on our student involvement committee. You all know her from Jackson State, so we're very excited to have her, and she's on the panel tonight. So a double thank you to her. And if you don't know about our student involvement committee, it's growing. I'm trying to grow not only the student side, but also the practitioner side. And we're going to have some new events coming up, some revisited events, our video contest probably in the new year. We typically do these student involvement chats quarterly, and they're usually on the last Tuesday or the fourth Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. This time was different because next week will be Thanksgiving, and I know y'all don't want to sit here while we're all thinking about Thanksgiving, so we bumped it up a week. If you want to be added to the list that gets emailed by me with reminders about the meetings or any other student involvement committee issues, you can shoot me a private email. You can drop an email to students@tnota.org, and I will get that. If you have any email changes, reach out. Or if you have any ideas of any other topics that you want to see included in this chat, or any other things that you want to see the Student Involvement Committee do, please do so. I do want to remind you that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on the TNOTA website. So if you're a panel member, I would ask that you keep your camera on, at least when you're answering. If you're a student member, it's whatever you feel comfortable doing. And then panelists, feel free to share as much or as little as you're comfortable sharing. You don't have to give names or specifics, but I just want you to be able to feel free to share, but just to share exactly what you want to share. So let's go through, and I'm going to just call out people one by one, and I want you to introduce yourself, tell us what OT or OTA program you graduated from, and then what type of setting you're currently working in. We'll start with Hayes.
Hi, I'm Hayes, and I graduated from UT in Memphis, and I'm currently doing pediatric outpatient.
Thank you. And Olivia?
I am Olivia. I graduated from UT Health here in Memphis and studying majority schools, but I also have a PRN job working in outpatient ortho very rarely, occasionally, but that's in there.
Very neat. Jonathan, we'll get the other UT person in here real quick.
I'm Jonathan Richardson, and I currently work at the VA in Humboldt, Tennessee. It's kind of like skilled nursing facility / assisted living, and I graduated from UT Health Science Center.
Thank you. And Dina?
Hi, I graduated from Jackson State University in Jackson, and I'm currently working with Dr. Mike Chu at Jerryhab and Barbara Musner with TLC. And I'm doing a range of, I've got clinics, then I have outpatient, and I'm also doing children with school base, and I'm in adult daycares too. I've got a good range. I love it.
That is awesome. Lavanya.
Hi, I'm Lavnia.
Lavanya.
I graduated from Belmont in Nashville, and now I'm working in outpatient neuro.
Okay, great. Thanks for being here. Christian?
I graduated from UT Chattanooga, and I'm actually a travel therapist. So I'm in between gigs right now. So I just finished skilled nursing facility, and now I'm going to an inpatient.
Thank you. Gabby?
I graduated from the OTA program at South College in Nashville, and I was working in pediatric outpatient clinic, but I recently moved cities and am expecting a baby in 2 weeks, so I'm currently not working.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. If you have to leave, we understand. And Madeline?
My name is Madeline. I graduated from the OTA program at Jackson State Community College, and I work PRN in a SNF, but it's basically full-time. And then I work PRN at inpatient rehab facility.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So first, I'd like to ask, what resources did you use when searching for your first job? And I'll present it first to Olivia and then Lavnia. And then if anybody else has anything to add, feel free to add after those two.
So mine came from mainly the connections that I had made during fieldwork, during observations. Both places that I'm working, I did a fieldwork rotation at. But I kind of maintained those relationships throughout. One was a level 1, and I would always shoot her a question if I needed to. And then my other one, it was a level 2. So kind of right after graduation, I already had that connection. So kind of capitalized on that. And then also just looking through Indeed and LinkedIn majority.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, very similar. I'm actually working at the facility I did my level 2 field work in. And so I kept in touch with my CI, and she was super helpful, helped me through like interview process, just like study material for the boards, things like that throughout kind of that last couple months. And then once I actually took my exam, I mentioned it to her, and she facilitated, reaching out saying, hey, we have an opening. So definitely, yeah, if you have any contacts that you make over the years, like she was the biggest help for me.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add? Anybody do anything different for the job search? All right, well, let's move on. What was the interview process like? So I'm going to ask Hayes to start and then Madeline to answer.
So my interview process was a little bit unconventional because I also was coming from a level 2 field work, and that was the outpatient center that I'm at now. And so I kind of already knew like the hiring staff, and I already knew the people that were conducting the interviews. So my first interview was kind of like a shortened type interview, a little bit less formal. And then my second interview was kind of more like observation type thing where I got to like go and observe at different locations. Because I ended up being at a different location than I did my fieldwork, although it was all under the umbrella of the same facility. So my second half of my interview was more along those lines. So a little unconventional, but.
Okay.
My interviews, so my first interview at the SNF that I'm at, I live in a very, very small town, so everybody knows everybody, and that's kind of how I made that connection. Was my name got brought up and someone made some phone calls. They kind of said some good things about me, I guess. And then I got an interview, got called in, and just I'd already talked to my boss on the phone. So it was kind of just like, hey, I just need to bring you in for a couple more questions and just to make it just for paperwork situation. That's really how that interview went. And then my second interview for the inpatient rehab, it was a level 2 that I'd been at. I'd already known everybody, all the staff. So it kind of was very informal and just like, hey, we just kind of needed to bring you in type situation, just for paperwork stuff. That's really it.
Okay. Does anybody want to jump in and share any like interesting interview questions or formats or things that you're asked or how you prepared for your interview?
Yeah. Well, I had one interview that threw me for a loop a little bit, where they gave me like a simulated kind of patient scenario, and they asked me in front of them to do a treatment plan, which was shocking. It was not too bad and it was low stress, but I definitely didn't like, prepare for that going into it. So it was a surprise, but it ended up being kind of a good challenge.
I've heard of a couple people getting asked those questions. Anybody else?
If I could share a question that I had at my interview, I also was in the category of I ended up getting hired where I had my level 2 at as well, but I still, got interviewed in a group by all disciplines. And a question that the manager asked that I thought was interesting was if there was to be a billboard of Taylor posted over Houston, what are 3 things that would be on my billboard? I was like, oh,
Oh,
I don't know. What would I put out there? So that was just, I always thought a very, very interesting question. And I have heard at an inpatient facility where I was at, I did a lateral transfer from outpatient to inpatient. So my interview process was a little different, but for people who were doing inpatient rehab, they also had case studies where they had to provide treatment ideas and interventions, or they were quizzed on their medical knowledge because it was a more, intense facility that had more medically fragile people, and they want to make sure that you had a baseline of information understanding.
wow. I like that billboard question too. That's very dynamic. Does anybody else have any other neat scenarios or questions or things that made you pause and think, oh, I should have looked up, looked this up a little bit more beforehand. Any other
I
comments?
have a question I was asked that I received positive feedback on, that they said a lot of times like new entry-level OTs or just transitioning from student to practitioners don't always answer that way. And they were just asking a very simple question on what would you do in a situation where you didn't know the answer or the protocol for something. And I'm gonna ask somebody for help. Like, I'm not gonna be afraid to ask questions, ask my colleagues to how to do something, not only for my safety, but the patient's safety. And she's like, you'd be so surprised at how many people say they would just kind of troubleshoot the situation and try to figure it out themselves, when it's really okay to ask coworkers for help when you don't know something.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. That's a great point. Anyone else have anything to add?
This one wasn't super interesting, but I was asked if I had any plans or if I was currently a member of AOTA and TNOTA.
Oh, were
It
you?
wasn't
Okay.
a requirement, but it was very highly encouraged. And I think in school we are forced to have that membership. But then as a new grad, you really have to make that decision, say, okay, what can I gain from this? What resources are available to me? But I thought that was interesting that they really wanted AOTA and TNOTA memberships.
That's good to know. I'm sure that TNOTA will be glad to hear that question too. I will tell you, being on the other side and doing interviews, a question that I started asking people, because I got some very interesting answers, is where do you see yourself in 5 years? Doesn't really sound like that hard of a question, but I will tell you, it helped me weed through some people too, from some of the responses that I have gotten in the past. So that's always something good to keep in the back of your mind. Do you have a plan? Did anyone interview more than 1 or 2 places? Just a couple of places. It sounds like a lot of connections were made during the fieldwork experiences, and I think that's a great takeaway. And I think that's something that we need to teach our new incoming students, because when they're thinking ahead and thinking about their field works, even just with level ones, how making that initial impression. And Taylor, you're nodding because you're in charge. You know how this is at your university. So I think that that's something really good to emphasize.
I
So
wanted to add on that.
yeah.
Real quick, something that I always encourage students also as a side note is to, when you're on your level 2, and if you really want to on your level 1, it's okay as well, but to take your resume to the hiring manager and just ask them if, just from reviewing your resume, would they hire you? And I think that's one of two things. One, if you're interested in that place, you get the perspective from your potential person who would be interviewing you or hiring you. But it's also good to have somebody who is responsible for reviewing resumes to provide you with feedback. And so it can be a very just easy way to kind of say, hey, would you hire me? Also, I would like feedback on my resume. So I always encourage that on level 2s, especially because you have that time to establish rapport. A recommendation.
That is good. And then to piggyback on that, Taylor has volunteered to lead our next student chat on resume building, resume writing, a workshop for that. So make sure you put that on your calendar, because that will be very, very helpful. So that will be in February 25th. Next, let's talk some about the different benefits and things that you're offered. And I'm not looking for any kind of salary or, oh, I was offered this much, but just talk about if you ever were offered anything like a sign-on bonus, or if you're offered continuing education, reimbursement, if you're offered health insurance, retirement plans. We'll start with Christian on this one, and then we'll let Madeline take over. And I want to hear Jonathan too on this one with his work setting.
Okay, so I am currently doing travel therapy, so it's going to be a little unique. But so the pay is done hourly, but you also get housing and meal stipends that are non-taxed. And so when you look at your pay and the benefits that you're actually getting, it looks a lot different, just because you have to take both of those into consideration. So I basically looked at trying to think about how to word this. So I looked at how much I was going to be making per week, because you get paid every week, especially just with my company. And so looking at what I'm making per week and then how much insurance costs, and comparing that to like the housing in the area, and just seeing like, what is it worth it to go to this location for this amount of pay, because every setting and every location in the country is going to pay you a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Madeline, do you have any insight on your side?
So I'm PRN, so every place varies. So every PRN place is different. With one facility, the inpatient rehab, I do get 401k, and I can add on. I'm only 21, so I'm still on my parents' insurance, but if like for the future, I can add on other smaller insurance. Like I think there's vision and like a smaller health insurance policy that I can add on, but I'm personally not doing that as of right now, just because it doesn't really benefit me. And that's really it. I'm opening a 401k in both facilities just to go ahead and start that. But other than that, PRN for me right now, insurance wise, it's just not for me.
Right. Okay. And Jonathan, how about you?
Yeah, so I currently work at a veterans home, and my company's functional pathways, and it is contracted to the facility. So we are not receiving the state benefits, but I still receive good benefits. And some things that they let me know, like they reimburse my state licensure whenever I renew that, if I were to stay with the company. And then they also do MedBridge for free for me, which is awesome because I can get a ton of CEUs. They also do 401k and some things like that. I mean, health insurance, dental, all of that stuff that we can pick to take out of the paycheck.
Mhm. Great. Does anybody else have anything to add along those lines? Or did you hear any classmates talking about, anything unique that they were offered, or maybe what helped them tip the scale with compensation on, one way or the other?
So in the schools, there's a contract company, or you can work directly for the board. And I kind of went back and forth. Contract typically pays more per hour, but you're not paid for days that you're not in school. So snow days, inclement weather, anything like that, or Veterans Day, we were just out. Where board hired, I'm paid salaried, I'm guaranteed that money. Another thing, I got mileage reimbursement through the board, but if I were to do contract, I would not get. But you're still required to go to different schools with both. So that was something that also kind of led me towards the board hired route, along with the state benefits that Jonathan was talking about.
Thanks.
I also want to add that the SNF that I'm at is, because it's such a big company and they have multiple different facilities throughout the state of Tennessee, that I'm not only PRN at one facility, I'm PRN at multiple different facilities. So if the facility, my main home facility, doesn't have enough clients for me, that I can go to a different facility, and I do get paid mileage for that as well. So that's another thing that I really liked.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else?
I get paid for mileage.
Mm-hmm.
And I was gonna add, I have a classmate and we both have prior degrees, and sometimes that's useful to bring up in an interview as well, because that can influence your salary depending on the setting you're going into.
That's true, especially in some school settings, and maybe not in Tennessee, but in some other states. I've heard there's different tiered pay, especially in the public school settings. Anybody else want to add anything on benefits or other compensation or reimbursement types of things?
I wanted to add one more thing about the travel. I forgot to mention, you can enroll in benefits directly through your travel company, but I've opted to not do that, because if I wanted to, because I go in between two companies, just because that works better for me at the moment, and so it's easier not to use their insurance. They also, it's dependent on the company, but they do pay you for your mileage up to a certain amount when you do change to a different location. You also get some you can build up sick leave and PTO, and then some you also get MedBridge access, and some you don't, and they just pay you a certain amount for CEUs, so it really is dependent. But those are some good benefits that I forgot to mention.
Okay, great.
And I have one more thing. One that was kind of important for me in my decision. Also, public service loan forgiveness, which might be in limbo moving forward. But if you work directly for a state government nonprofit, you qualify. But if I were to go that contract route, even though I'm working in the same school district, working with the same people, I technically would not qualify because I'm not working directly for the government. So that was something to consider if it's a qualified employer.
That's a great point, Olivia. Thank you for sharing that. Good. Yes. And we'll just have to kind of, the current students will have to keep an eye on that and just see how the laws and different things change year after year. But yeah, that's a great point. So next, let's talk about a typical day in the life at your work setting. Like, do you get time for paperwork? Do you have a break for lunch? Do you work through? Just kind of fill us in on a typical day in the life of at your treatment setting. And anyone can jump in that wants to start, or I can call on some people.
I can go ahead.
Thanks.
In outpatient, we have a pretty predictable schedule, especially with outpatient neuro. A lot of our patients are coming to us for years at a time. So we know our patients really well too. So it takes a lot of the chart reviewing out of it. especially with patients that we see regularly, but we'll come in from like 8:30 to 5. Every patient gets like a 1-hour appointment with our outpatient session. So we have 8:30 to 9. We get documentation time, catch up, chart review if you have any evaluations, things like that. And then we'll get an hour at some point in the day for lunch. And typically, most of our therapists divide it up where it's a half an hour of lunch and a half an hour again of documentation time. So for us on our end, we do have a lot of flexibility with it. Worst case scenario, we have access to documentation at home, but they try really not to let us do that, which is nice because we have the full hour, but yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Let me hear from somebody else.
I can go. So when I was working in the pediatric outpatient clinic, also as an outpatient clinic, there is kind of a set schedule. You see the same patients usually, either like 1 to 2 times a week. So my typical day would start in like reviewing if there were any cancellations for the day, prep any special materials or handouts I maybe wanted to have ready to go for the day, so I wouldn't be running around like between sessions trying to do that. I would do my treatment sessions. A lot of with kids, it's like with older kids, it's a little bit easier to do point of service like documentation. With like, we would have sometimes kids that are 8 months to like 12 months old, and that's a little bit harder because they kind of need your undivided attention. So I would use, there'd be 5 to 10 minutes between sessions sometimes to catch up on notes, or sometimes I would just do handwritten notes, and then later in the day we have it was about a 45-minute block period to like catch up on any notes that I had maybe fallen behind during the day, and just clean up and repeat those sessions all throughout the day. It was usually about 8 o'clock to 5:30 for my schedule. What was really unique about my clinic is they have a lot of part-time workers, so you can essentially let them know whatever schedule you wanted to work, and they would fill it up with patients. So if you said you could only work 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. on Thursdays and Fridays, then they would give you a patient caseload for that. So that's not super common, at least from what I've seen, as far as part-time work goes for like OTs or OTAs. But it was really convenient for my schedule because I was able to kind of find a routine that worked for me. But yeah.
Yeah. Dana, what about you in your adult setting?
In the adult setting at the adult daycares,
Mm-hmm.
we have to be really on top of them. So if one has not shown up, then that gives me an extra hour in the day to catch up on getting the notes caught up. But I am able to document from home, and I just now got access to the school systems so I can document while I'm working. But some of the kids are so young, you can't turn your back on them. So I generally wait till I get home to document.
Mm-hmm. Hayes, what about you?
So for my outpatient, we do kind of like, she said we have a lot of flexibility, which is super nice. And so I'm still currently like, as a new OT, like I'm still building my caseload. And so mine looks a little bit different, but in general, we can have appointments anywhere from 8 to 5. But we have some therapists that will work. You can work 32 hours and still be full time. So we have some therapists that will work like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and then not work Fridays. And then I work Monday through Friday though, and then just work like until normally like 2 p.m. on Friday. But you kind of just come in and do all of your things based upon what your appointments for the day look like. So normally as a new grad, still doing like treatment planning and all of those things, I normally come in a little bit early just to make sure that I have everything set up for the day so that I'm not like scrambling. And then we get an hour of lunch. We have 12 to 1 off, so we can use that time kind of however we want to. A lot of people will do like 30 minutes lunch, 30 minutes of like catching up and documentation. Some people will use the whole hour. If we have like meetings and stuff, sometimes we'll do meetings during that time. And that's like a good time because everyone's on lunch at the same time. So like if OT, PT, and speech all need to catch up on something, or we have an in-service, or we have like a special speaker, that's kind of when we use that time. And then whenever you do like your clock in and out, you just say that you didn't take lunch because you had a work requirement or whatever. So, but we normally, some people as people like start to have kids and all of those things, they'll start like changing kind of what appointment times they accept. So like we have some therapists that work 9 to 4 and then some that work different hours. So it's a lot more flexible than I thought it was going to be, but I really am thankful for that.
Good. Good. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add or share about their day in the life of their work setting?
So for me, because I am in a SNF, I'm just gonna kind of explain what we do there. So because I'm a new grad and I'm still kind of getting the hang of things because I've only been there for like a little over a month. I come in, we can come in whenever we want to, really, as long as we come in, get our patients done in a timely manner and stay consistent with our productivity. I mean, as long as we're just doing our job, they don't really care. But for me, I come in most of the time around 7:30 to 7:45, and because breakfast is served at 8, and so I come in, I look at my schedule, I review it, and sometimes if I have time after that, I will go get like a specific patient out of bed if I know that they like to sit up and eat breakfast, and go ahead and get them started. And so we print off our schedules, and because we kind of just like with PT, we kind of coexist with them and make sure that we're not overlapping or anything. And that also, I keep that paper in my pocket and I fold it up and I write down like my times I go in and out. And then like I jot down little notes of like what I do, because I have anywhere from 5 to 8 patients a day, and by 2 o'clock, I forget. And I'm like, okay, what did I have to do with that patient? Because every patient's so different. And by the time you get there, the patient might be sick or they don't feel good, or you have to completely change your whole entire plan that you had in your brain. And so that's what I do. And then I don't take a lunch. Well, I don't take a lunch. I just kind of snack at my desk while I'm doing my documentation, because by 2 o'clock, typing 7 or 8 notes is not for me at the end of the day. So I go ahead and try to get 2 or 3 on my lunch break. Because I'm PRN, if I work over 6 hours, I have to take a specific lunch. But if I don't, then I don't have to clock in and clock out for that day. So clocking in and clocking out really just kind of depends, because no matter what throughout the day, I'm always either on my computer documenting. Also in the mornings, we have this little website called Matrix, and all of your patients' information is in there. Like nursing puts notes in there. So early in the mornings, I go look through that just to see how my patient did throughout the night, if they needed any medication, just kind of be up to date on how they are that day. And that's really it for me.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's shift gears and think back to being a student. It wasn't that long ago, although it probably seems like a lifetime ago. And thinking back to that, what were some of your classes that you would say were most beneficial to you now as a therapist, now as a practitioner, either a class, a course, or those types of experiences that you did when you were in your educational programs? I'll start with Jonathan and get his opinion from the UT perspective.
I'm laughing because I was going to offer to be the first person to speak anyways.
Oh, good.
But I would say surprisingly, like biomechanics is humongous, because so many people that I deal with day to day, and I didn't even realize this in school that much, but fall prevention is one of the biggest things I deal with day to day. Like it does not matter how strong your upper body is or what you have going on neurologically with like little deficits. If you're going to fall, that's a huge thing I have to pay attention to. And so I also get people out of bed like constantly. And so it is really important that I know bed mobility like the back of my hand, and the easiest way to save myself and the patient from any sort of hurt and to make things as easy as possible. And also, a lot of residents are not bedbound, but limited out of bed activity. So it's really important that I also teach them bed mobility so that they are as independent as possible, even within their little space in their room with like functional reach and different things like that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm glad that you were going to share that anyway. That's very helpful. Lavnia, what do you think?
I think for me, well, in my setting in general, neuro was definitely the most helpful. There's so much information that I pull back from my notes from classes to patients that I meet today. But also we had like occupational performance, and we just kind of looked through how to treat a patient, deciding if we're restoring or modifying. Like, I still break it down for each patient because we see a lot of people with chronic conditions, and sometimes it's a mixture of both. But again, like I feel like that's always in the back of my mind every time I do an evaluation or even like recertification.
Okay, great. Christian, what about you?
I would say there are two that come to mind as really important. One being our adults class, because that's where we learned transfers, we learned a lot of the diagnoses, we learned how to do basically everything with adults. And so has been really, really helpful for me to come back to that. And then the other one is advanced clinical practice, because that one we took right before we went off to field work. And that was like a review of everything we've learned that's super important, but also adding in not just the basics, but like how do you go beyond just being a basic, like good practitioner to being a great practitioner that like learns more about what your clients specifically need where they are. So I thought those were really helpful.
Awesome. And Gabby?
We had it was called therapeutic methods, and essentially like you were given a caseload and coming up with treatment plans, and like would have practicums where the teacher or your classmates would kind of try to act like the patient on the caseload, then you would essentially do your treatment session with them and see how they react. So I thought even though it wasn't the real thing, it was a very good like stepping stone into actually applying to how that may look like when you start working. So just like running through things that could go wrong, because you always have a plan A and then B, C, and D, and F, because things always go a different way when you're in your treatment session. So it was good to kind of troubleshoot through some of those problems like in a classroom setting and talk through them before going out into the real world and working.
Thank you. I think we had somebody from several different OT programs and OTA programs on that answer. Does anybody else have anything to add or anything different?
I would say for me, my PEDS courses, all of them, especially the ones that had labs. And I know Dr. Henderson helped with some of those. And so just getting that hands-on practice, even if it was just with a baby doll, is so important and was so helpful. Like when you get into the true setting, because you really learn so much of that in field work. And so I feel like those labs are the most that you can be prepared prior to going to field work. So I feel like a lot of what I learned was in field work, but having that background of that hands-on, and I'm also a hands-on learner, so that also helped with carry that through. Um, but I think just like adding all of the PEDS courses together, because we had multiple and they kind of built on each other. And so having those was really helpful in the order that we had them. To kind of create the full curriculum of what it looks like developmentally for a kid and all of those things.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have anything different that they thought was beneficial from their educational program? Well, let's ask this question, then maybe we'll open it up to some questions from our student viewers. What piece of advice would you now, as a practitioner, offer current students? And anyone can jump in as you feel led.
I think looking for a job that has a mentor. I think coming in, it's very overwhelming, and having someone to walk you through, and not necessarily holding your hand, but just having some guidance, someone that you can go to with questions, and you know that you're not going to bother them. Like, that's what they're there for, and they can kind of show you how they want you to while you find your OT identity. But a mentorship was a huge thing that I was looking for.
And to piggyback off of that, at my facility, we have to do my facility is connected to like a bigger hospital system. So there's like lots of red tape and stuff in addition to being in the outpatient center. But I have competencies. So like basically I have to get checked off on my competence of all of these different skills. Anywhere from like being able to do a chart review to like looking at specific diagnoses. And so I was really thankful going in to have that kind of buffer of time to be able to do that, and the time that was built in for me. Like I didn't jump in and have to build a caseload immediately. I kind of got to have some time to observe, but then also started taking almost more responsibility and treating kids to get the checkoffs finished. So the end goal is like the checkoffs would be done, but I got a lot of great learning time built in. And that kind of connected with the mentorship, although it was a little bit more informal, it was still there. And so I think that having a facility where I felt connected to other therapists and I never feel like I'm on my own was huge for me. I can walk into the back office and ask an OT, a PT, or an SLP a question if I need that. And so having that kind of security was really big for me as a new grad, because something that I've always struggled with is confidence. As a new grad, like that's really hard when you're surrounded by people that have been doing it for so long. And so that was a really big portion, a big part of why I chose the facility I chose, was just having those people constantly around me, even if the mentorship wasn't like a formal thing, like it was a more informal. But I was really appreciative of that, and I still am, because it gives you so much more room, I feel like, to grow, and to learn, and to constantly be adding to your toolbox. And because having a lot of OTs on the team, they all think super different. So like being able to observe with 4 or 5 different OTs, you can kind of see different perspectives and points of views, and you can kind of see people have different specialties and different things that they're really good at. And so having a community where it's like nobody is better than the other, but they all have their areas of special interest. And so like I know like if I have a question about vision, I go to this person. If I have a question about like orthopedics, I go to this person. So it's like it's a very supportive community that I felt like has really built my experience as a new practitioner.
Thank you for that, Hayes. Anyone else
As
have?
far as I'm sorry.
Yeah,
As
go
far
ahead.
as the TOTA aspect for me, the hardest thing for me going into it was learning everything that my OT expects to be in the note.
Mhm.
So if I have anything I would say to any new grad is, if you could study, get with somebody who knows how to really write a good note to make sure you have everything in there, so that anybody that comes in behind you can read your note and what you did beforehand.
That's good advice.
I'll also add something else. So even as like you're reaching towards the end of your coursework and graduating, that doesn't like I don't think you should limit yourself to like your fieldwork experience with the exposure to the settings. Like feel free to network with people who have been on panels or professors and observe them job shadow in those settings even after you graduated. I did it while I was studying for the NBCOT, and it was just a really good way to expose myself to settings that I didn't really get to see, because field work you only have a couple placements and you can't be in every single setting. So take the opportunity to reach out and try to expose yourself to as many settings as possible, because you never know what you're going to be interested in if you haven't seen it before.
Good advice.
I think for me is being open to like anything, being just not being stuck on, okay, well, I want to be in this specific setting. Because personally, I never thought that I would be in a SNF, and I love it. Because you never know, like every facility's different, every facility has their flaws, but also every facility has their pros. And you may get to a facility or a setting that you never thought you would be at, and you may love it. So just kind of be open to anything. Look for things that stick out to you, because what I like may not be something that someone else likes, and how I feel comfortable in a facility may not be how someone else feels comfortable in a facility. So just kind of know who you are and what you like and the pros and cons to yourself, and be confident in those, because that's going to take you a long way.
That's good. Any students have any questions for any of our panelists? Feel free to unmute yourself. If you are not comfortable doing that, you can type it in the chat. Right now, we've got some of our panelists dropping their email addresses also in the chat if you want to contact any of them personally. But do we have anybody that wants to ask any of the panelists a question?
I do. My name is Latia Emanuel. I am actually in the Occupational Therapy Assistance Program at Nashville State Community College. And my question is basically along like the hiring process, and this anybody can answer this question. What can someone do who is gonna get an interview? What can they do to stand out among other candidates? Like, what characteristics should they possess? What should they portray off to the interviewer?
Can I jump in on this?
I was going to ask if you would.
Yes. Yeah. So my biggest piece of advice is to speak your passions. They know that when you're coming to that interview, they know occupational therapy as like a subject matter because you passed your boards and you graduated your schooling. So speak your passions. That's what I personally want to hear, because when I hear your passions, I hear about the type of therapist that you are, that you want to be, and I can think about, okay, how can I help support you as a possible clinician in my practice area? The other thing that I would highly recommend, and this goes back to interview questions, is if somebody asks you what a weakness of yours is, actually give them a weakness. Do not turn the weakness into a strength. That's not why they're asking. They're not trying to fish out whether or not you've got dirty laundry or anything. They genuinely want to know, one, we're all flawed, we're all humans, we have things we can work on, but also, do I have the capacity to support you and what those weak areas might be?
Great advice.
Thank you.
Any of our panelists have anything to add on to that?
I'll jump in. I would say most importantly, present yourself for who you really are. Like, don't try to be someone that you think they want, because at the end of the day, when you start that job, they're going to figure out who you are. They're going to know all your quirks and they're going to love you regardless. So just be yourself. And then also a big tip is after every interview, I was told this and it's been really helpful to email or contact the person that interviewed you and thank them, because not a lot of people do that. And that can be the deciding factor between you and someone else that has the same qualities and credentials.
That's true. Any other students have questions?
I think also, I was going to add on to that. To do like a thorough review of like the company's website or maybe their like mottos, and like come with some substantial questions, like at least one or two to ask the interviewer. A lot of times people, if you're worried about getting asked questions yourself, so you don't always think of which questions to ask. So like writing that on a little index card or something to help you remember the moment is really helpful too.
Definitely do your research beforehand. That's a wonderful point. Anybody else want to add anything, or any students have any other questions? We'll double check the chat. Thank you for everybody that put your email address in there. And again, this meeting's being recorded. If you want to view it again or check back on something you might have missed, this will be posted on the TNOTA website under the student section, under the virtual student chats. We'll get that posted ASAP. Anybody else have anything they want to add? It's about 10 till. Anybody else want to have anything else they want to add, or any final points?
If no one else has a question, I have one more question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
And my question is targeted towards the NBCOT. Do you guys like have any resources that y'all use to study? Y'all have like a podcast? Do y'all have like just what did you guys use to study? I'm looking to pass the NBCOT the first time when the time does come.
I'll go. Nobody jumped on it.
Go ahead, and then I can refer them to some other things after you.
My number one recommendation, hands down, was the NBCOT study pack. And I personally, and I should say this is not endorsed or anything, just my own personal experience of what helped me as a learner. But I appreciated the NBCOT study pack because it came with practice tests, it came with flashcards, and it came with a game, which for myself, who's a little neurospicy, having the game tied in with the learning content was very helpful. Not related to resources necessarily, but I highly encourage you to take as many practice tests as humanly possible. There are, like I mentioned, the NBCOT study pack comes with books, and then there's also Therapy Ed book has some practice exams too. And I would encourage you, when the time comes, to just take an exam without studying. This is what I did. I took a practice exam, because what will happen is when you when they score the exam, it'll tell you what domains are you struggling in and which ones are maybe you're just soaring flying colors with. So for example, in the neuro area, I was like acing that because that was my strong suit. The cardiopulm area needed a little bit more love. And so I used that information to build my study plan, because it wasn't, in my mind, it didn't make sense to equally study everything and burn myself out, when in reality, I do know this content. I just need to focus more on some of these other areas over here. So that would be my 2-3 recommendations.
That's good. And then the other thing, if you haven't already, go back and look at some of our other student chats. We had the author of the Therapy Ed Review Manual, Dr. Rita Fleming Castaldi. She spoke and gave some tips like on the format of the exam and some of the questions. And then we also had a representative from the NBCOT, Barb. And so we had both of them kind of back to back. So one from the Therapy Ed book and one from the actual NBCOT, and talked about the different ways the questions were asked and how to answer them. And there's different formats and some changes with the exam year to year. So go back and look at those recordings are on here. They also have YouTube channels and different questions that they post on social media. So I encourage you to look at those resources as well.
OT Mary is a good one.
I'll add on to that too. For me, I liked the AOTA. I think it's called a study pack. I don't know, but it comes with practice exams, and the difference between those and the NBCOT ones is that you can look back at what you got wrong and see like how to better and what you're missing more. I think the NBCOT just gives you like a plain up score and you can't review any of it. That's as far as I can remember, but I thought I got both of them and utilized both of those to make sure I was well-rounded in my test taking.
Okay.
I thought OT Exam Prepper was really helpful. It is a podcast, and I'm not a podcast girl, but they have episodes. Some are like 7 minutes long, some are like 30, 45, but he gives you different strategies, mnemonic devices, whatever to remember. And not a resource, but just maybe some advice. I think it's a lot of pressure anyway. You don't have to tell people that you're taking it when you're taking it. I think some people feel like they need to tell everybody, and then they feel this overwhelming pressure like, oh, everybody's going to know I failed. You don't have to tell anyone. Nobody has to know when you're taking it. If you pass, you pass. If you don't, move on and you can take it again. But I think just to kind of ease some of that pressure, like I told, I think 2 or 3 of my best friends and left it at that, just so you can kind of ease your mind.
And
That's good advice.
piggybacking off of Olivia, the OT Exam Prepper, he also provides free like printable versions of those mnemonics and stuff on his website, which I found really helpful to like print out or like write yourselves, depending on it's good to know what your learning style is. So whether it's auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, like you can use these different resources and find the right mode to study.
Also want to piggyback off Olivia, not really resources, but just kind of advice. My CI told me whenever I started studying for the test, and it kind of really helped me. This test does not define who you are and what kind of practitioner you are going to be. It's just a test that we have to pass just for certification purposes. It does not define you no matter what. You're going to be a great practitioner. You've studied, you've done the work, and you just have to pass a test, no matter how many times it takes. And you're going to get there. And just always believe in yourself and just go in with a mindset that you got this and this is what you've been working for, and you're going to be great and you're going to do great things.
Well, that's a great way to end it. I like that. I want to thank everybody tonight. I want to thank Taylor for being on here and for helping co-host. I want to thank all the students that viewed and that are asking questions. And I want to also thank those students that are going to view this in the future. And last, I want to thank our panelists. For those of you that I know, I handpicked you because I knew you'd be wonderful. And for those of you that I don't know, you were handpicked by somebody else. And they thought you would be wonderful at this. So you are very much appreciated. And we wish you continued luck on your journey wherever you are with your student, on your student side or on your new practitioner side. And we hope you continue to stay involved too with the TNOTA because it can be very beneficial to you both as a student and as a practitioner. So everybody have a great night and a great holiday as we're leading up into Thanksgiving. And thanks again so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.